Hey, peace and blessings to you. My name is Jere B. I am the entree musician, and so are you. Welcome to part 2 of our podcast series entitled Milestones and Next Steps. You may recall that the week before last, we provided an introductory as to what we're trying to accomplish in this series, which is primarily twofold. First, as I stated, I was offered an opportunity, a great opportunity, I should say, by Dave Ehninger of Across the Road Productions in Katy, Texas, to choose a few of my songs to be mixed and mastered in Dolby Atmos. This came about when I was in Houston this past June at the Springboard Conference, and I met the amazing Danny Jones, who not only is Dave's business partner at Across the Road, but who has had the distinction of working with a veritable who's who in music. From the great Alan Toussaint, you remember him? His great work, the Beach Boys, Bo Diddley, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Patti LaBelle, Etta James, Ramsey Lewis, and it just goes on and on with him. Dave and Danny were kind enough to allow me to visit Across the Road and experience the genuine Atmos experience. It was like nothing I've ever felt, and obviously I interviewed both of them, or I should say each one of them, in this podcast, and I'll make sure that I put the links in there. We talk all the time now. We have become fast friends, so I jumped at their offer of having my songs experience the Dolby Atmos process. And I also stated, I believe I did in the introductory episode, that you'll soon be a part of this experience and being taken backstage in each of our studios and walk through each one of the steps with us, from my prepping and sending the files to them, which I have yet to do. I'm going to do that. And you will also sit in on what's happening on their end when they receive the files and what process they walk through. There will be several conversations between us, of course, during the process, and I'm even now thinking of how I can have an interactive experience so that you can dialogue with us online if their schedule should allow. I'll let you know if this develops. But both gentlemen were kind enough to come onto the Entree Musician Mastermind. This happened a Sunday or two ago, and they shared with the private community that we have the technical aspects of what Dolby Atmos is and what it is doing. It was a real good discussion. It went on for more than 2 hours, and our Entree Musician community loved it. By the way, if you want to join the Entree Musician Mastermind, just reach out to me at theentremusician.com and I'll hook you up. It's an encouragement community. We're growing very organically, and we often feature special guests, and we share information, we share resources, advice, we share music we're working on, and even collaborative opportunities. We're open all week through our private Facebook page, and we get together every Sunday night on Zoom. So let me know. It's a great community. But back to the music. So what I did was, in these 3 songs, instead of deciding myself which ones I would choose, I posed the questions to our email list, both the ones here at the Entree Musician and also at sounddoctrine.com, which is the wonderful band and project I've been blessed to serve since our inception in 2001. I asked and received wonderful feedback about which tunes should be chosen. And in doing so, this entire process sent me down several reflective journeys, which is how I arrived at the title for this series, Milestones and Next Steps. Because each song is a story, and every story is important. And I realized in the conception of this podcast, at least this podcast series, that although I have shared a few things about my life, I think I have, especially lessons, obviously, that I've learned and how they may be able to help you as an entree musician. What I haven't shared is much about my personal life, and specifically my approach when it comes to songwriting and production. And I was only reminded of this about a month ago when another dear friend of mine, Irma de Jong of iClassical Academy. By the way, I'm grateful that my course on iClassical Academy has gone live in their prestigious community and institution. In fact, it went live this very week of my taping today's episode, which is August 25th, 2023. And often Irma has said to me, Jerry, you should tell more stories about yourself. Now, I got to admit, I would like to hear more stories about others than telling my own. But I do understand its importance. I really do. So if you would indulge me, I'll briefly share the stories which are behind these three tunes and how I was personally impacted and how I grew as a man and as a musician and producer as a result of where I was when I wrote these songs and recorded them. So the first song chosen for the Dolby Atmos rendering is the first one I'll talk to you about today. Interestingly, it is also the first song which appeared on Sound Doctrine's first CD back in 2002 entitled Perseverance. I don't have a copy of it around to show you, but the name of the song is Incipience. And I must admit, I was a little surprised by this choice because I tend to lightweight cringe a little bit at the production, because of my skills at the time and the technology I owned and had access to, the lack of a budget, and perhaps 13 other factors I can't recall. But I released the song obviously as it was. But I gotta tell you that Incipience, the song itself, is very special to me. I actually composed it back in 1986. My eldest daughter, Jere, was 3 years old at the time. She's 40 now. Her mother and I lived at 150 Ellenwood on the south side of Youngstown. And my brother-in-law, Phil Moore, who had not yet married my sister Roz, and my oldest friend in the world, Tyrone Williams, my soul brother for real. I've known him since the second grade, and we were kind of gathering together at my house and kind of trying to put some semblance of a recording studio together in my dining room. Now, Tyrone, a guitarist all his life, he had purchased a Tascam Porta 1, which we were in complete awe of. I mean, the ability to have 4 tracks on a cassette, to be able to bounce them down to a total of about 12 until the degradation became a real issue. Phil, my brother-in-law, who's a bassist, he had bought a Casio CZ101 and a Roland TR-808. All I had was a drum set, a few mics, and more time on my hands than they did because they both had steady day jobs and I was a part-timer at my uncle's moving company. Well, we recorded 2 songs during that process, Cruise Control and Tootsie Roll, which I still have on a hard drive and may release someday just for the heck of it. But over time, here's what happened. I somehow melted the Tascam Porta 1. I mean, smoke coming up from it because I was overloading the tape signals constantly. This was only a cassette, remember, 4 tracks, and I was an absolute novice, so I was overdriving everything. Now, Tyrone, my brother's character, he's always even keel. He didn't trip out. He just went out and purchased a Porta 2 and left that with me to experiment with. What a friend, right? Of course, I begin to respect the signal flow, right? And I begin to understand what the red peak lights actually meant. Now, in the meantime, another childhood friend and brother of mine, Craig Burney, he was in the Navy at the time, but when he came home on leave, he had purchased the Ensoniq Mirage. You remember that? Old people like me? This was an absolute marvel to each of us. It was a sampler and a synthesizer. Floppy disk to store our grooves on. Come on, man. We were with it. Here it was, right in my dining room. And what was best about this situation is that he could not take the sucker back with him when he shipped back out to sea. So I got to keep it, right? And so it was then and there that I began to fantasize about becoming a real songwriter and producer. I was always a good lyricist. I was always into music, and being a drummer, beats were easy for me to come by, and I'd, be somewhat rapping, somewhat singing these lyrics, but I really didn't play anything. Now, some musicians will probably say that about me now. Jere really doesn't play anything. But other than the cheesy sounds that we were settling for coming out of that Casio, the Mirage sounded as close to a real piano as we had heard before. The drums were more lifelike, the bass and the strings sounded great. This is good, man. So as the days went on, I pretended to be a piano player. Now, I'm not a pianist. I would never ever call myself one. but I pretended to be. And lo and behold, chords began to come through my fingers. And before I knew it, the earliest form of Incipience was born. I don't recall the name that I called it at the time. But the song is written in 3 sections, which are really disjointed and abruptly goes from major to minor without, any warning at all. But it was something that was really inherent in the groove that told me, yo, everything is going to be okay. So I ended up staying up all night, working out all the parts as best as I could and recording those parts on that Porta 2. After I'd bounced everything down, I walked over to Phil's house the next day and I had the 2-track cassette tape and we played that sucker for about 2 hours straight. I felt like Quincy Jones. Now later, as the years passed, I kept the tune in my pocket, and around 1994 or so, I was playing it for Robert Bubba C. Christian. Bub C. Because Rob knew more about music theory than I, he began to correct a few notes which were completely wrong and gave me a better strategy to navigate between the 3 sections. I'm completely grateful for his adjustments because they gave the song life. Fast forward to 1999, I am now 4 years married to my beautiful Lori. My second daughter, Nia Joy, is 2 years old, and I'm in ministry, and I'm playing drums at the New Bethel Baptist Church in Youngstown, Ohio. Now, as is the norm, after church service ends, there's generally a jam session which immediately follows the benediction. All the church musicians get together and jam it out. At least that happens in every Black church service that I've attended. So after church, this dark, lanky gentleman who looks like Snoop Dogg, he walks up to our organist who instantly jumps up and turns the organ over to him. Now, I'd never seen this guy before. This dude, who later introduces himself to me as Clifford Barnes, begins to tastefully and gingerly assault that Hammond B3 in a way that I have seen very, very few keyboard players do. I mean, absolutely incredible. And when we finally did have a chance to talk after the session was over, I'm telling him about the project that I have in my mind, and I'm trying to get musicians and singers together, yada, yada, I get his number, and I call him the first chance I get, just to let him know, yo, I'm really thinking about doing this. Now, Lori and I are living at 269 East Judson Avenue, again, south side of Youngstown, right? Small Cape Cod. And I've transformed the upstairs back bedroom into my studio. As I'm thinking about this now, I'm going to have to hunt for pictures to show you soon because I think I have some somewhere. I think I had a digital camera in 99, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. In any case, I was moving up the technology ladder a little bit, so my studio was being beefed up. I had a Tascam 688 8-track cassette. I still have that same machine to this day, even though it's sitting as a museum piece in my home studio. I had a Dell computer back then. I was running Cakewalk Pro Audio 9. I was running the first version of SoundForge, Vegas, Acid, which was actually given to me by Sony, and I'll have to share that story with you sometime. But I had the Akai MPC, and I knew I could do no wrong. And as a MIDI keyboard, I was using the Kawai K1 2. Okay, the Kawai K1 2, version 2. Yeah, I had the Ensoniq EPS rack, remember that? Had a large library of floppy disks. I had a PVPA system amp running Tannoy monitors. But I was set for life. However, unfortunately, just like that, the nation suffered the disastrous attack on 9/11. My youngest daughter, Yana Simone, she was born only several months earlier. So I was employed at WKBN 570 AM radio as a talk show producer. And like most people at the time, I was completely rocked by what had happened. It was an absolute life-changing moment for me in many ways. Musically, of course, I knew the CD had to come out, and it had to come out now. I mean, this music thing, which had Never really been a hobby. I'd been serious about it, but it was never even close to being bread and butter. This was now a point of urgency for me. I had never seen that amount of instantaneous destruction in my life. And the devastation brought the reality of my mortality to a much closer place. And if I were going to die, and we all will someday, I definitely wanted to leave some sort of statement that I had been here in the first place. So music was it for me. So I began to assemble everyone I knew, all kinds of singers and musicians, of course, including Cliff Barnes, who came over to my little bedroom studio, and he began blessing me with his presence. In fact, Cliff's contribution to Perseverance and to Sound Doctrine, the band, over time, is so important. It would not have been the same without his participation. In fact, I would not be the same man without his friendship and his musicianship. Cliff melted his madness into this song, Incipience, in such a way that glued together all of my inconsistencies. His participation really added joy to the music. You will hear joy here, and I believe that Cliff is a big part of that. He has the ability to anticipate exactly what a song needs, and he adds just the right touch, which he's gone on to do for major artists now, like Pieces of a Dream, David Sanborn, Marcus Miller, and many others. And then there's Christopher Rhodes, again, another childhood friend and brother, and who, like Craig Burney, who I mentioned at the time, they were both in the Navy around the same time, but Chris made a career out of it, and he's one of my favorite bass players. Growing up, we played and performed together literally hundreds of times, literally, but we had never recorded together until this record. He was on leave while we were recording and returning from Japan, and he brought his bass into the room and dropped the solo like he had written the song himself. Another great person on this song is Rick Wilmich, whom we affectionately begin to call Uncle Slicksterly Jr. for reasons I won't explain here. But he added the killer guitar to this mix, and he also very generously, graciously provided the additional, much-needed recording space, and he became the chief engineer on the entire project. Rick used to go out with us on the road as a guitarist and vocalist. I met him when we were working at WKBN, and I had actually started training him for my positions. And, we began to talk music, and we became fast friends. So I'm so grateful for his blessing on helping me to improve my understanding of recording and production techniques, which I continue to use to this day. And I gathered some drum loops, and I thought these loops would work on the song, and I played the rest of the instrumentation, although of course it sounds like it for sure. But at the same time, this was a milestone for me. And although, as I said, I do cringe a little when I hear this first iteration, I'm still very, very grateful. I rounded out the song with some samples from home recordings, first beginning with my eldest daughter using her voice juxtaposed against my youngest daughter crying to symbolize both the human birthing process and the growth process as well. And by the way, my youngest daughter that you hear crying on this song is now 23 years old. But then I cut to a conversation that we were having with my grandmother, Laura, my heart, who was actually holding my daughter, Nia Joy, in her arms as an infant for the first time. And just that experience prompted me to ask her how my grandfather Hector, my heart, who had passed away by this time, but how my grandfather came to meet her acquaintance and subsequently ask her out on their first date. So she was gracious enough to tell her while she's holding my new baby, along with my wife Lori, and of course our Aunt Joan, her daughter, was there, and my grandmother began to tell the story. I'm blessed to have caught this moment on tape. It's a treasure, as she herself passed away just a few years after telling that story. Finally, there's the dialogue between Nia Joy and I. Again, while my grandmother's holding her, she's an infant, but at this point, she's 3 years old. Now she's 26. But in the audio clip, Act 3, she's sharing with me that she had changed her name to Lucy, much to my dismay. So that's the background story behind the song. Allow me to play it for you right now, and then I will return to tell you what's going on with the next steps for Incipience. And I will put the YouTube link in the show notes.
Bird.
That's persistent. Now that's how persistent pop. So he would turn 5. So what would you say now? I want to know what you said. Just say something. But you could. So he picked you up, then you have a car, so you walk up the house and walk.
This is Incipience, the way it appears on the Perseverance CD in its original form. Now, you should know that the version that I'm going to be sending to Across the Road for Dolby Atmos processing is a completely updated hybrid. In fact, I've been remixing all of the songs from the Perseverance project to prepare it for the 25th anniversary, which is coming up soon. So, Incipience is in a reboot of sorts. I augmented the drum loops and I added my own drums to it, electric drums, and I retooled the bass line, and I kept Rick's guitar, Cliff's piano, and obviously the home recording loops, right? But I made the painstaking decision to remove Chris's furious bass solo because the masterful saxophonist Mitch Lawrence, who was with Sound Doctrine from 2015 to 2018, I believe, but he was always burning this track up as we were doing the song in rehearsals. So when I got this remix together, I asked him to spit on it and got far more than I bargained for. So I made the decision for him to be the main feature, and he tells the incipient story like no other, as you can hear it playing underneath me now. I love this song and I appreciate how far it's come since 1986. It has grown and matured right alongside my daughters, and I'm extremely grateful for the journey. I mean, who knows where the Lord will take it next once Danny Jones has remixed it in Atmos, right? And what about the new category of fans that are destined to hear it in that format? Wow. I'm really appreciative of what's happening. And I'm thankful for you for allowing me to be on this journey with you. These are milestones and next steps. And the next time that we'll get together, we'll talk about the second choice and the story behind that. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my heart. This is fun. My name is Jere B. I appreciate you so much. Come and hang out with us at theentremusician.com. As you know, I am the Entre Musician, but what I feel is most important, I tell you this every time I have the opportunity, so are you. We will see you again next time.